What if the most powerful prophet in Israel's history almost quit before he even started? I'm Elisha. This is my untold story. Picture this. You're plowing a field, minding your own business, when suddenly the most famous man in Israel walks up and throws his coat on you. Not a handshake, not a hello, just drops his mantle and walks away. That's how my story began. And let me tell you, it was nothing like I expected. I'm Elisha.
Yes.
The one who parted the Jordan, raised the dead, and made iron float. But before all those miracles, I was just a farmer's son who nearly talked himself out of the greatest adventure in biblical history.
You see,
You see, there's something the scriptures don't tell you about that famous double portion of Elijah's spirit. I almost didn't receive it at all, and the reason why will blow your mind. Most people think I confidently stepped into Elijah's role, ready to work miracles from day one. The truth? I spent months trying to convince God he'd made a terrible mistake. Sometimes the most powerful testimonies come from the most unlikely people, and trust me, I was as unlikely as they come. So let me take you behind the scenes of my calling, my fears, and how God turned my greatest weakness into my ministry's foundation. Because what happened next changed everything. I thought I knew about divine purpose. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun was beating down on our family farm in Abel Meholah. I was behind our oxen, working the 12th pair of plows,
yeah, we were that prosperous.
when I saw him. Elijah. The Elijah, walking purposefully across our field like he owned the place. My heart stopped. This was the man who called fire down from heaven, who outran chariots, who raised the widow's son from the dead. Why on earth would he be heading straight towards me? I tried to look busy. Maybe if I kept my head down, he'd pass by. Because he was highly revered, feared even in our nation. But no such luck. Without a word, he walked up, took off his mantle, that famous coat everyone talked about, and threw it over my shoulders. Then he just left, turned around and walked away like nothing happened. I stood there, frozen. The mantle felt heavier than a millstone. My brothers were staring. The servants were whispering. And I was hyperventilating. Lord, I whispered under my breath. Surely you meant to choose my older brother Joash. He's the one who leads our family prayers. Or what about Samuel from the next village? He actually knows scripture by heart. But deep down I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calling, and it terrified me. I ran after Elijah, the mantle flapping behind me like a flag of surrender. Wait, I called out. Wait, let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I'll follow you. He turned around with this knowing look. Go back, he said. What have I done to you? What have you done to me? What have you done to me? You've just turned my entire life upside down. That's what. But I understood. He was giving me a choice. I could keep the mantle and follow him, or I could take it off and go back to my plows. No pressure, just the weight of destiny hanging in the balance. I went home, slaughtered my oxen, burned my plowing equipment, made a feast for everyone, because I knew there was no going back. When God calls, you don't keep your backup plan warm. But here's what the scriptures don't tell you. I cried through that entire farewell feast. Not tears of joy, tears of absolute terror. The next few months were the darkest of my life. Following Elijah meant leaving everything familiar. My family, my farm, my comfortable, predictable existence. And for what? To become a target for every king, priest, and false prophet in Israel. I knew what happened to prophets in this country. They got threatened, chased, thrown into pits, and sometimes killed. Elijah himself had a bounty on his head, courtesy of Queen Jezebel, and I was supposed to be his successor. During those early days, I spent countless sleepless nights by the Jordan River, watching Elijah pray, thinking, how can I ever measure up to this? The man could stop rain for 3.5 years. He could multiply oil and flour. He could raise the dead. Me, I could barely remember the names of the 12 tribes without counting on my fingers. One night, I was sitting by the river, questioning everything, when Elijah found me. I was crying again. Something I seemed to do a lot those days. Having second thoughts, son, he asked, settling beside me on the riverbank. I wiped my eyes, embarrassed. How do you do it, Elijah? How do you stay so confident in God's power? You never seem afraid. He laughed. Actually laughed. Afraid? Son, I've been terrified most of my life. I stared at him. What? You think I wasn't scared when God told me to confront Ahab about the drought? You think I felt brave walking up to Mount Carmel to face 450 prophets of Baal alone? You think I was calm when Jezebel put a price on my head? But you always seem so sure of yourself. Elijah picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. The difference is, I learned to be more afraid of disobeying God than I was of following him. Fear isn't the enemy, Elijah. Disobedience is. He turned to look at me, his eyes serious. Want to know a secret? After Mount Carmel, after that great victory over the prophets of Baal, I ran and hid in a cave. I was so depressed, I asked God to let me die. You did? Oh yes. I told God I was no better than my fathers, that I was done, finished, a complete failure. He chuckled. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like every prayer I'd been praying for months. So what changed? I asked. God reminded me that His strength is perfected in our weakness, that He doesn't need our competence, He needs our availability, that He doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. That conversation changed everything, but the real test was still coming. The real test was still coming. Years passed. I served Elijah faithfully, learning, watching, growing, but always in his shadow, always the assistant, never the main character, which honestly was fine by me. The main character usually got killed first. Then came the day I'd been dreading. Elijah told me it was time. God was taking him home, and I would carry on the ministry. No, I said, just like that. No, I'm not ready. Find someone else. But Elijah wasn't having it. He started making his farewell tour, visiting all the schools of the prophets, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho. And every time, he tried to leave me behind. Stay here, he'd say. The Lord has sent me to Bethel. And every time I'd respond, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. Why did I keep following him when I was so terrified? Because deep down, I knew this was bigger than my fear. This was bigger than me. And if I walked away now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. At each stop, the sons of the prophets would pull me aside and whisper, "Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" "Yes, I know," I'd answer. "Keep silent, keep silent. Because if I talked about it, I might lose my nerve completely." Finally, we reached the Jordan River. 50 prophets followed us, watching from a distance. Elijah took his mantle, struck the waters, and they parted. We walked across on dry ground, just like Moses at the Red Sea, just like Joshua at this very same river. Once we were alone on the other side, Elijah turned to me. "Ask what I may do for you before I am taken away from you." This was it, my one chance. I could ask for anything. Wealth, fame, a comfortable retirement. But instead, I heard myself saying words that surprised even me. "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." Elijah's eyebrows shot up. "You have asked a hard thing." A hard thing. I was asking for the impossible. But here's what people don't understand about that request. I wasn't being greedy or ambitious. I was being brutally honest about my inadequacy. I knew I needed twice as much of God's power, because I had half as much natural ability as Elijah. The double portion wasn't about being twice as good. It was about being twice as dependent on God. Nevertheless, Elijah continued, "If you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." Great. No pressure at all. I just had to keep my eyes open during what was probably going to be the most spectacular supernatural event in Israel's history. While trying not to faint from terror, we kept walking and talking. Then it happened. A chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated us. A whirlwind took Elijah up into heaven. I saw it all, every impossible, terrifying, glorious second of it. My Father, I cried out, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen. And then he was gone. Elijah was gone, and I was alone with a torn coat, a dropped mantle, and the weight of an entire nation's spiritual destiny on my shoulders. I picked up that mantle with shaking hands. This was it, the moment of truth. I walked back to the Jordan, which had flowed back. We passed, struck the water with the mantle, and said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" Nothing happened. My heart sank. I'd seen him taken up, but maybe I wasn't worthy. Maybe God had changed his mind. Maybe, then the waters parted. My eyes widened. God answered. He actually answered. I walked on the dry riverbed in awe. The 50 prophets watching from the other side fell on their faces and said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elijah." But I didn't feel powerful. I felt overwhelmed, inadequate, terrified. And you know what? That feeling never really went away. Every major miracle in my ministry happened when I felt most inadequate. When I parted the Jordan, I was shaking. When I healed the spring at Jericho, I had no idea what I was doing. I just heard God's instruction, threw salt in the water, and prayed desperately. When those kids mocked me, and I called down bears, honestly, I was just having a really bad day, and snapped. When I raised the Shunammite's son, I lay on that dead boy 3 times, breathing into his lungs, praying, "God, please, please, don't let me fail this family." When I made the axe head float, I almost laughed at how impossible it sounded when I heard my own instruction. An iron axe head, floating. But the young prophet was crying because it was borrowed, and I couldn't stand to see him so distressed. When I multiplied the widow's oil, I told her to collect every jar she could find, not because I was confident it would work, but because I figured we might as well go big if we were going to fail. When I fed 100 men with 20 loaves, I was doing the math in my head, thinking, this is going to be embarrassing. But that's when I learned the most important lesson of my entire ministry. God doesn't need our competence. He needs our availability. He doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Just as my master Elijah told me years ago, every miracle taught me the same thing. My weakness was actually an advantage. It kept me humble. It kept me dependent. It kept me desperate for God's power instead of relying on my own abilities. See, if God had chosen someone naturally gifted, naturally confident, naturally powerful, they might have started thinking they were doing the miracles. But with me, there was never any question. Every supernatural thing that happened was obviously God, because I and everyone else knew Elijah. My fear became my strength, because it drove me to my knees. My inadequacy became my qualification, because it made room for God's adequacy. My weakness became the perfect canvas for His power. I spent 40 years in ministry after Elijah was taken up. 40 years of miracles, prophecies, and divine encounters. I advised kings, raised the dead, healed the sick, and even performed miracles after I died. When they threw a dead man into my tomb, he came back to life just from touching my bones. But none of it happened because I was brave or qualified or naturally gifted. It happened because I was available. because I said yes to a calling that terrified me, because I kept following when everything in me wanted to run. Looking back now, I realize God knew exactly what he was doing when he chose a terrified farmer's son. My fear kept me humble, my inadequacy kept me, and my weakness became the perfect showcase for his strength. The scriptures say that Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, but they don't mention that he was smiling when he went, because he knew he was leaving the ministry in good hands, not capable hands, available hands. You see, God has a habit of choosing the most unlikely people for the most important jobs. He chose a shepherd boy to be king, a stuttering fugitive to lead the Exodus, a teenage girl to bear the Messiah, and a terrified farmer to be his prophet. If you've ever felt too young, too inexperienced, too flawed, or too afraid for what God is calling you to, congratulations, you're in excellent company. Every great servant of God has felt exactly the same way. Moses said, "I can't speak well." Gideon said, "I'm the least in my family." David said, "I'm just a shepherd." Jeremiah said, "I'm too young." And I said, "You've got the wrong guy." But God doesn't make mistakes. When he calls you to something that feels too big, too scary, too impossible, that's not a bug in the system, that's a feature. He wants you to know it's him doing the work, not you. The next time God calls you to something that terrifies you, remember this: he's not looking for the qualified, he's looking for the available. He's not seeking the capable, he's seeking the willing. And sometimes the very thing that makes you feel disqualified is exactly what he wants to use. That mantle Elijah threw over me wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was an invitation to impossibility. It was God saying, "I want to do something amazing through your life, and I need someone who knows they can't do it alone." Your inadequacy isn't your disqualification, it's your invitation. Church, invitation. Your weakness isn't your limitation, it's your launching pad. Your fear isn't your enemy, it's your reminder that you need God's power, not your own. So what's God calling you to that feels too big for you? What's your mantle moment? That invitation to step into something that terrifies and thrills you at the same time. What's the thing you know you should do, but keeps making excuses why you can't? Maybe it's starting that ministry you've been thinking about. Maybe it's having that difficult conversation. Maybe it's taking that job, writing that book, adopting that child, forgiving that person, or stepping into that leadership role. Whatever it is, remember that God's power is perfected in weakness, that he uses the foolish things to confound the wise, that he chooses the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. Don't wait until you feel ready. You'll never feel ready. Don't wait until you feel qualified. You'll never feel qualified. Don't wait until you're not afraid. Fear might be the very thing God wants to use. I never stopped being that terrified farmer's son, but I became a terrified farmer's son who said yes to God, and that made all the difference. The double portion of Elijah's spirit wasn't about being twice as good as he was. It was about being twice as dependent on God as I naturally was. And in that dependence, I found a power I never could have imagined. Your story doesn't have to start with confidence. It just has to start with availability. It doesn't have to begin with ability. It just has to begin with willingness. God is still looking for ordinary people to do extraordinary things. He's still choosing the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. He's still calling the weak to showcase his strength. The question isn't whether you're qualified. The question is whether you're available. What's your answer going to be? This is Bible Behind the Scenes, where we uncover the stories they might not have taught you in Sunday school. If hearing Elijah's story through his own eyes opened your heart to God's power and purpose in your weakness, hit that subscribe button. Comment below what surprised you most: that the mighty prophet was terrified of his calling, or that he asked for double portion because he felt inadequate. Next, we'll bring you an untold version of another Bible story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about God's unexpected choices. Until then, remember, your weakness isn't your disqualification. It's your invitation to see God's power perfected in you.